Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Shawna Khalafi, and we are continuing to follow the impacts of the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran over the weekend and the retaliatory strikes that have followed. These strikes on Iran, as well as the retaliation, have also disrupted the global energy supply chain. Attacks throughout the region, including on two vessels traveling through the Strait of Hormuz, could restrict countries' abilities to export oil to the rest of the world. So for more on the impacts of this, let's bring in Patrick Haan. He is the head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Shawna.
So, Patrick, the global markets are already seeing the impacts of this. Oil prices rising sharply when the market trading began today. So tell us more about the consequences we're already seeing from these strikes and what can be expected for the global markets coming up.
As you mentioned, we've been seeing a risk premium that has already been factored in for the last few weeks on the heightened risk that something would occur. Now that it has, WTI and Brent crude oil prices did jump in early trading by over 10%. Now they've paired some of those gains. WTI crude oil is still up 3 to 4%. That's going to translate into rising gasoline prices across much of the country. Of course, that has been a trend now for the last few weeks. The Iran attacks are going to escalate the seasonal uptick in gas prices that we generally see every late winter and early spring. The question is how much higher and how quick will we get there? I estimate that the Iran attacks that the U.S. has started may boost gas prices by 15 to 25 cents a gallon over the next few weeks. Of course, there's a lot of potential developments here, so we'll have to stay very close to seeing what develops. The Strait of Hormuz becoming a focal point for moving forward. Of course, about 20% of the world's oil supply does traverse through the Strait of Hormuz, so any action there is going to be very critical. And that is a vital waterway that we're all going to be watching very closely here over the next several days.
And Patrick, when you're talking about those impacts for consumers, what countries are going to be the most affected by this, even outside of the U.S.? And then how soon will everyday consumers maybe be starting to see the impacts of this?
Well, certainly, first and foremost, China has been the biggest buyer of crude oil from Iran. And now that has been something that has, over the last few weeks, been put at higher risk. So China may not be the beneficiary of this oil, at least for now. We'll have to see what develops here in the days ahead. A lot of haltages in the Strait of Hormuz because of this. And that is why oil prices are reacting. China is certainly the primary beneficiary of that oil. Having said that, though, it does impact oil prices globally. If China is not able to acquire oil from Iran, they're certainly going to go to other customers, which is why oil producers are all seeing oil prices go up on the possibility that there will be less oil from Iran, or more importantly, I think at this point, whether or not the Strait of Hormuz will be blocked in some manner, what that looks like, a lot of details here. But keep in mind, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on global oil markets to keep this waterway open. So look for attention to pivot onto the Strait of Hormuz, whether it's the United States or the Middle East countries. I would look for some security spotlights to be put on what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz if it's not rectified here very quickly.
And speaking about the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, actually today we're getting reports that an official from the European Union's naval mission says that vessels have been receiving transmission from Iran saying that no ship is allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz right now. So can you talk about how vital this corridor is for the global oil and gas trade, and then what would happen if it does totally close, even just for a temporary time?
Well, it's extremely vital. 20% of the crude oil flowing from the Middle East goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And as you mentioned, the Iran Revolutionary Guard, several sources having said that they essentially were telling ships to stop moving, though in real time that is very hard to enforce. But as a response to that, we are seeing ships drop anchor. We are seeing shipping insurers raise rates considerably, kind of causing the collateral damage of ships holding in place. So a lot to be said there. If this waterway is disrupted for more than a week, it really could be far more impactful to the price of oil. So keep an eye on that in the days ahead. This situation is far from over. Now the attention may focus from Iran to the Strait of Hormuz. What Iran may do, certainly unpredictable. We've already seen missile strikes across the Middle East, and that is why there's so much focus on the uncertainty brought on by what could happen in the Strait.
And as you mentioned, this may be just the beginning of this conflict, more countries getting involved as well. So if this does continue, will those prices just continue to rise? What is the long-term impact that could come from this?
Well, as long as there is attention, as long as there are disruptions happening in the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices will be impacted. Unless there's clarity, I think that we'll get a little bit of clarity. Even silence can act as clarity so long as there's no new rhetoric around the Strait of Hormuz. It may last another week or two before we get some sort of clarity, or a lack of new threats could also be seen as clarity. But it could be very impactful. Keep in mind, much of the world's developed countries are large consumers of crude oil. Countries like China, United States, consuming a lot of crude oil from the Middle East. This is extremely disruptive, and that's why I would expect that a lot of attention will be paid on the Strait of Hormuz in the days ahead because of its power to potentially continue to disrupt the price of oil. If there is clarity, I think you could see oil prices eventually declining again if we do see some sort of clarity or assurances on security for those vessels in the Strait of Hormuz.
And last thing here, Patrick, for people in the United States, sometimes those gas prices can be different when you're on the East Coast, West Coast, depending on what area you are in. Is that something that we could see here, or would it be a total country effect spreading pretty evenly? What would it look like for people within the U.S. depending on their area?
Yeah, Shawna, we are in the midst of beginning the transition to cleaner, more expensive blends of summer gasoline. So that does complicate the situation. When it comes to Iran's role, the impact to oil prices will be felt pretty evenly across the country, but the numbers may look different. The West Coast right now is really at the height of the transition to cleaner summer gasoline. In addition, refinery shutdowns in California over the last few months are pushing prices higher, especially on the West Coast right now. We've already seen large increases in state averages in Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, all of that really attributed to seasonal transitions. Now, much of the country is going to see an impact from Iran that could amount to an increase of 15 to 25 cents on top of the seasonal increases. So, bottom line here, consumers in virtually every state are going to be seeing gas prices go up the next several weeks, and we may not see any relief for potentially several months.
We'll certainly be watching for those impacts. Thank you so much, Patrick de Haan, the head of petroleum analysis at GasBuddy. We really appreciate your input here.
Thanks, Shawna.